What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So, Bryan Harsin and Auburn football have been in the news over this past weekend and throughout the week, and not for anything good, unfortunately. There have been accusations of an affair between Harsin and one of his assistants, which there is no solid evidence of, and I'm not saying if he did or didn't do it. That's not what I'm here to talk about, but the accusations are out there, and it is a bad look. There are no real evidence, there's no real evidence behind a lot of these accusations. A lot of people who are calling for his job based off of this, if really pressed, wouldn't have any solid things to show you as, proof that he's doing any of this. But all of it is out there. It is all in the media. I'm sure you've been able to see it by now if you've been paying any attention. And it's just not a good look all the way around for the entire program, and particularly for Harsin. Like I said, a lot of people are calling for his job at this point. And at one point, he was expected to resign, but as of now, at least, it seems like Harsin has doubled down and will remain at Auburn next season. At least for now, this is a very fluid situation, very much so subject to change. I've kind of tried to wait this one out to see if any more news broke around the situation, and there really hasn't been for the most part. Just more of, reports coming out that Harsin will likely stay at Auburn next season. But I don't think he's going to be there long term at this point, and I don't think that you should really even consider him much of a candidate for Auburn going forward beyond this season. I think you can basically look at him as a lame duck coach at this point, heading into next year and maybe the year beyond, but I honestly don't think he even survives next season. So let's get into why I feel that way. So to begin with, we need to talk about how Harsin has done on the field in his 1 year at Auburn so far. He went 6-7 in his first season, oftentimes put out a pretty abysmal showing on the field. He was largely unimpressive in his initial season with Auburn. He almost immediately rubbed a lot of people the wrong way upon his arrival with the program. There were tons of questions about if he was a culture fit, etc. There was a large segment of the administration and boosters who never wanted Harsin to be the head coach at Auburn in the first place, and so he was already not on a great situation then, and he sort of didn't help himself out when he did arrive. They did have some high moments like almost beating Alabama, but almost beating Alabama isn't really something to hang your hat on for that season. So overall, not a very impressive season for Harsin to begin with. Relatively poor on-the-field performance, and you follow up the administration not being fully on board with you with a 6-7 season, and you get some hot seat talks already for Harsin. His name was also mentioned multiple times in multiple other coaching searches during his time at Auburn, particularly with the Washington job at one point, which obviously didn't end up taking place, but it just added to the narrative around the program at the time. Then he had a mass exodus of players leaving the team via the transfer portal, which suggested that he wasn't all that popular with the team either. Also, a lot of those players, I think, weren't buying into the vision he had at Auburn. And even if it's not entirely his fault, it could be on the administration, but players could tell that there wasn't a lot of buy-in in the program, and they weren't very happy about the way the future looked. And so they had, I think it's 20 or 25 players now have transferred out of the program at this point. He has also lost 5 assistant coaches in his time. Defensive coordinator Derek Mason resigned and took a $400,000 pay cut to move schools. His first offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, had some flashes of being good this past season, but overall underperformed and was fired. Then the replacement for him has now resigned about a week or two ago as well, all in just a few months' time, and things in Auburn look to be an absolute shambles. You add on to this that a lot of the players that have left the program have come out and spoke negatively about Harsin. One player went so far to say that he treated them like dogs, and you could chalk this up to just players who aren't used to hard coaching getting hard coaching for the first time. I promise you, if you go to any locker room in America, there are players who will say these kinds of things about their coaches, regardless of who the coach is. There are unhappy players in every locker room. But when you hit that, that voice and that thing starts to get out and get into the public perception, you combine that with your assistants always leaving, the administration having issues with you, and now the off-the-field scandal that he's had with the potential affair thing, which again, not saying he did or didn't do anything there, but it's the public relations aspect of that. And it's just a very untenable situation for Harsin going into next season. They also didn't sign a single player on the February signing day that just passed, and the heat is absolutely on for this Auburn program. They have very high expectations, And the affair, like I said, I don't know if he did or didn't do it, but it broke at a very convenient time, in my opinion, for Auburn. This kind of news doesn't usually get out unless somebody wants it to, and I feel like if Harsin won 10-plus games in his first season and had this program on a different trajectory, you'd probably never hear about any of this, regardless of if it's true or not. And I don't think any of it gets out to the press. I don't think any of this becomes nearly as big of a situation. You don't hear about these players complaining about them, and if you do, you treat it a lot differently because the team is succeeding, and so you naturally think that player is the problem or those players are the problem, not Harsin. But now with everything else, it sort of skews the perspective and the view of him and the Auburn program. Now, I obviously don't know for certain that somebody leaked this information out to try to make Harsin look even worse and try to justify firing him 1 year in. I can't prove that, but it certainly does seem that way. Winning fixes everything in a lot of ways around programs, especially in big-time college football, and Harsin isn't winning so far in just one season, to be fair, but lots of people are already unhappy with him, which makes it a very easy situation to see where somebody who doesn't like him just releases negative info about him to try to get him fired, especially because of the buyout situation at Auburn. They're still paying Gus Malzahn. They fired Harsin right now, they'd be paying something like $40 million to coaches who aren't coaching for them anymore. And that's really just unaffordable for most programs, but also for Auburn. Takes a huge cut out of their budget for hiring a new coach and a new staff. And you're just 1 year in at this point. I mean, it seems like a totally terrible situation around that program at all. But regardless of who leaked the story and why, like I said, it just piles on to that terrible look for the program right now. Just a few weeks ago, I made an entirely separate video on why I think Auburn is in serious trouble as a program going forward in the SEC West, and that was before the new offensive coordinator resigned and all this drama surrounding Harsin got out. It was before it was official news that Derek Mason had left. It was before all of these things, and it just seems to prove myself right in that video. Not that I'm trying to brag on that or anything like that, but it just seems to all pile onto Auburn right now in a very, very bad look. So even if it does look like Harsin is staying, why do I still consider him a lame duck coach? Well, in addition to the things I just said about his time so far at Auburn, which have already led to him being incredibly unpopular due to a myriad of reasons there, not nearly all of them are just his fault, but he is very unpopular at Auburn, and his on-field success did not immediately, serve to change those opinions about himself. Going forward, I don't think that's going to get any better for him. I don't see a real path for this program to just start performing better in the future at this point. Auburn already has a problem where a large portion of their roster has left the program. There are at least a decently sized group of players who have a bad opinion of him. That gets around to other players as well very easily. Then you add in there in the most loaded division in college football, so competing wouldn't be easy even if everything was going their way, and they're clearly not. Coaches also don't seem to be terribly interested in working for him at this point, based on his recent history with 5 assistants leaving the program, and why would they be? If they go to Auburn, they have to play teams with more talent than them, much more cohesion than them, and a lot more support and buy-in from their administration than them almost every week, and they're still expected to put out good results with a head coach who's already on the hot seat, and if he gets fired, they're almost guaranteed to also be fired. Why would a good coordinator want to put themselves in that situation right now when the likelihood of getting fired is so high with how the program currently is? And the same can be said of high school recruits. Why would they want to go to Auburn at this point? They can't be sold that they're going to compete for the conference championship. They can't be sold they're going to compete for the playoff. They can't be sold coaching stability. Auburn likely doesn't have anything crazy enough in the NIL department to entice players in. The only thing you can really pitch is early playing time, which is not a strong spot to be in, especially in the SEC West. You look at their schedule next season, and who can you really expect them to beat? Not Arkansas, not Alabama, not Texas A&M, not Ole Miss, not Georgia, not LSU, and not Penn State. They probably won't be better than Missouri or Mississippi State either. Even if you call those wins for Auburn, you're still looking at a terrible season by Auburn standards. And in my opinion, Auburn is likely going to be the worst team in the West next season. I felt that way before all this drama hit. Now all this drama hit, and you've put Bryan Harsin in a spot where even if he comes back in good faith and in goodwill, there's no way he can perform his job as properly as everybody else can. There's no way that you can expect him to just be completely unaffected by all of the stuff going on around him by the program. There's clearly not enough buy-in in the administration, from the boosters, from the fans. There's going to be very difficult to win his locker room and his players back. His coaching staff is in absolute turmoil. Like I said, they didn't bring anybody in on the late signing period. How do you expect him, even if he is, the guy for the job and he's doing everything in good faith and he didn't have an affair, all that stuff didn't happen. At this point, Auburn has tied his hands behind his back to such an extent that I don't see any way he can really perform to the expectations they're going to set for him. I already didn't feel good about things for Auburn going into this season, and now you add all that onto it. I don't see any way that they have a good season next year. They're going to be an underdog against almost every single conference opponent that they face, and that's just not good enough for this program. Auburn demands much, much better than worst in their own division and losing seasons with off-the-field controversy. That's not what Auburn wants. If Harsin really wants to stay long-term, he's going to have to find a way to turn in a winning season at the least next year. And even just a 7-6 season probably won't be enough with how staunch the opposition against him seems to be. That's still probably not going to be enough to justify keeping him long-term there. They've really put him in a terrible spot, and in some of it is his fault, but in a lot of it is also not his fault. It's things out of his hands. It's a lot of the Auburn administration, boosters, even some of the fan base, putting him in a situation where there's really no way for him to win at this point. Now, if Harsin turns in the kind of performance next season that everything seems to be pointing to, do we really think Auburn even keeps him around for another year? They've already been very close to firing him. You add another losing season onto that, and I really don't see why Auburn would keep him. They've put him, like I said, they put him in such a bad situation into where I don't see any good long-term future between Harsin and Auburn. I see almost no scenario which he survives this season, short of him pulling off an absolute miracle and rattling off a 10-win season out of nowhere. I think that Auburn just didn't want to fire him at this point in the offseason when most of their candidates would be unwilling to take the job right now, right before spring practice in this February time period. No time to recruit their own players and get their own staff in and all that, develop their own roster, not to mention most of them wouldn't want to abandon the current rosters that they're on at this point. Then you mentioned all of the buyout stuff. I still think Auburn is trying to find a way to fire him with cause if they're going to fire him to avoid the buyout. And they're going to play hell trying to do that. And so you throw all that together, and you can understand why Auburn wouldn't want to fire him at this point. That's where a lot of people think they were trying to get him to resign, and that makes a lot of sense for him. So to me, it seems like Auburn just decided to give Harsin another year where they're likely expecting him to do bad, and then they're just going to fire him then when his buyout's a little bit lower and there's a much more time to find better coaching candidates. Maybe they can find some way to fire him with cause or something along those lines, and then they can say, well, we gave him a shot, even though they really aren't. It's sort of that, do your best, also we're not going to help you out at all kind of thing. At least that's how I see it. Maybe Auburn really does still think Harsin can put together a winning team on the field next season, and they're fully behind him. But at this point, that looks like an absolute long shot. I see nothing that really points that way. The real problem at Auburn is, though, that there isn't a single head coach in America who could have succeeded in the environment Harsin was put in last season, not to mention next season. Large positions of his administration boosters don't want him to be there in the first place. They're looking for any and every opportunity to get him out of there. Give any coach his schedule that he has to play, with the roster he inherited, and the little to no support and buy-in from at his administrative level and from his boosters and his fans, and they would have probably failed as well. I really don't blame Harsin for much of this situation. I think it's indicative of larger issues at Auburn more so than issues with Harsin, although he's not blameless in this situation either. I just really don't see much of a chance where he survives next year. At most 2 years at Auburn, regardless of who you want to blame. That is the long and short of this point. The point of this video is that Harsin's basically done at Auburn. At this point, it's almost a formality to keep him around, in my opinion. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about Auburn and Bryan Harsin in general. What do you guys think the future is for him and the entire future of the Auburn program? Also, if you made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a like because it does help out the channel tremendously. Subscribe to the channel for more college football content in the future, as I will continue to upload regularly going forward. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.